Dr. Castleberry here. We're jumping into student questions for COM 2143 Digital Media Literacy, and we're really just getting started. We went down the rabbit hole on the first couple of questions. Love it when that happens. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, right? Maybe you've turned the proverbial channel, quote unquote. Data would suggest so, but we're going to answer questions, right? We're going to go as long as we can till the rooster crows and it's time to, right, clock out. But let's tackle a couple of questions from Linda Spencer's writing well in the 21st century, and see if we can gather some good info there on that. Looking at Aaron's questions, chapter 2 starts off by noting that we read and write differently on a computer screen than we do on paper. By the examples given, wouldn't this be the opposite? Me personally, I am more likely to write on a computer because it's easier and quicker to type a thought than to write a thought. Okay, I see where you're going there. And let me reframe the situation, and perhaps it will allow revelation here. So Aaron prefers typing at a computer, her words here. As a student, however, your experience, your individual experience might be skewed, by a statistical norm. Right, the statistical norm of students type more than people, so they get used to typing. See where I'm going there? Also, a follow-up question I always have is, do you type more, or do you, for lack of a better term, do you text more, right? So there's a difference between if I'm typing something, the way I'm keystroking, versus if we have a lot more people nowadays, and the majority of their time, their digital time spent is doing, thummy thumbs. Or I personally recently encountered someone that was still into like single holding and then like pounding out, which is kind of the equivalent of when we had typewriters and people would be like peck, peckety, peck, 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 peck. And so I think that's the equivalent of people on a smartphone being like deet, 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 deet. I don't know. I don't have hard science on that. So we're not going to come to a firm conclusion, but I thought it was an interesting point of comparison. So think about your habits, right? Are you, could you be specially categorized just like we would with a student, right? Or perhaps in your profession, you've talked about some of the work you do, or have done at least in banking and other areas, spend more time in front of a computer. So you're more comfortable in that way. Whereas many people are still jotting down, notes or information by hand, pencil, pen, and so on. Throughout the chapter, the author, Linda Spencer, talks about the computer's ability to process words and how we shouldn't rely on that alone as the quote-unquote main dictionary. Another part of the book talks about the spell checker's ability to flag the verbiage of a paper. What are your thoughts on Word's capabilities? All right, so that is in Word, uppercase, as in Microsoft Word. What are my thoughts on Word's capabilities? Well, first of all, isn't Word a wonderful universalized tool for us that work in the Western world? It has so many positive functions and so on. I'm getting paid to say none of this. In fact, every several years, I have to upgrade my software. What is that all about? But hey, speaking of, we're talking about a lot in these week's discussion questions, having to acquire different languages. Updating software, that's yet another type of mechanism in the linguistics of digital technology that we have to be literate of. So that, because what happens if we stop updating, right? Software gets corroded, or runs risk, crash and lose it all. I'm getting scared just thinking about this because I need to update some stuff. So here's what I would say though. Word helps us all, right? Word's great, full of tools, but like everything, it has its limitations. And one of those limitations we could talk about, since we're grooming our writing styles in the major, is often Word doesn't always register those $10,000 words, right? The good stuff, the grad level vocabulary, or maybe some of those grammar rules that are on the outskirts. And sometimes it doesn't pick up on all of that. And so it does have its limitations. A couple of questions from Hannah. We'll start with the question, same book, Writing Well in the 21st Century. This chapter is full of incredibly useful information about the English language. Flips my understanding of grammar upside down. I was taught to never start a sentence with a conjunction or end with a preposition. The world changes so much, so often. How do you keep up with the fast-paced world? Hey, this is a practical question. I bet we're all feeling this at times. And in fact, I think we answered a similar one in week one, in the week one lecture response. And my response then, it would stay the same, is do your best. Always keep an open mind about learning something new. I think that optimistic glasses half full approach to continuously acquiring new information about our technology is important, because we can get really down in the dumps, not just about the costs of keeping up with the techno Joneses, but also just that constant need to update information. So it's never too late, never too far behind to acquire a different skill set. Remember, people are doing it all the time, all over the world, and we want to be a part of that conversation for varying reasons, and doing our best. Ultimately, it's going to help us being open to it. Let's turn over to the Pop Culture Introductory Perspectives book on page 42. Dennis C. explains the concept of hegemony as, quote, a commodification of culture controlled by those who held social, financial power, end quote. Really, isn't what is popular determine what is in demand? And I think this is great. I do think I would immediately go to, I think you highlight the chicken and the egg paradox, right? Yes, what is popular does determine what is in demand. So this is by definition like supply and demand in business economics. Yeah. If the demand is high, the supply will be high. Or if the supply is low and the demand is high, right, we pay more for the supply, and so on and so on. If the demand is high and supply is high, we also conversely might pay less. Anyway, back to it in the context of hegemony, which is a rich critical term. It's often associated with the theorist Antonio Gramsci, this deals with a central area of interest to critical scholars, power. All right, and so yes and no, right? So isn't what's popular determine what's in demand? Yes, but it's a yes, but it's a yeah, but yes, but our choices are often predetermined by producers, by investors, right? What is available to us is predetermined. So oftentimes what you find is someone has already it's not just merely a case of stacking the deck as in cheating. They've prearranged, the rules of the game. So then by the time it gets down to the basic consumer, your choice is to, in effect, predetermined. So that makes sense, right? So what types of shoes are available to buy have been already sort of filtered by certain things. They could be filtered by the power of the company. Nike, Reebok, Keds, Skechers, Dockers, whatever. Wait a minute, those are pants. But you see where we're going there. And then the same thing, well, okay, there's all these independent shoes or independent shoe stores. Or are there, right? And what is a lot of the cheap stuff? Well, guess what? It comes from overseas. So let's think about the rules again of economics, supply side economics. Can those third party vendors afford to have their product moved into the U.S.? Is it legal for them to bring their low price shoes into the U.S.? Lots of laws in the way, lots of embargoes or taxes, There could be questions about how they're made to begin with, and so on. Are there patents on certain ideas and products? See where we're going there? There's a lot more control than what we often recognize on the surface level, at the basic consumer level. Yes, I can choose between going to, I don't know, what's it, McDonald's versus Subway versus some third thing on a lunch break. But if that's all if all I'm choosing between is fast food restaurants, what does that then say about what I have access to versus what I do not have access to? I'm in an inland state. Do I have access to a lot of fresh seafood, or do I, is seafood higher here, and it's frozen for so long to get here that it both costs more and actually has diluted in its flavor by the time it gets here? So what a complicated, what a wonderful question that gets us thinking about these issues that do relate to power, and they do relate to this fascinating new term, hegemony. I hope all of you will maybe seek it out, learn a little bit more about it, but also think about something like, even when we use social media, what are your options outside of Facebook and Instagram? I bet for the majority of casual social media users, that's their top two uses, go-tos. And then people that are a little more maybe like into information sharing and heavy on news consumption, maybe more into Twitter. But if you're in the latter two, if you use social media accounts to maybe share your pictures or look at other people's pictures, you're probably using Facebook or Instagram. And then here's something further. If you get into we call like an internal dialectic of thinking about, do I like Instagram better, or am I a Facebook user or an Instagram user? Have you caught yourself in that kind of oppositional tension before? Because the answer is both are owned by the same company. They've both been bought out. In fact, if your alternative is to flee to YouTube, well, guess what? Same company owns YouTube as well. They're all owned by Google, right? Oh, no wonder they interact with each other so well. So now we realize, once again, this filter of choice is like, once again, are you Nike or are you Adidas, right? And so it's hard for like an Under Armour to come up and make strides, but it can occur, right, in a free market society. Probably mixing too many examples there, but that's okay. It's fun to mix those things as well. Propaganda theorists believe that media is just a tool for the dominant political groups. I lean more toward this idea myself, but there is a rebuttal argument against them that says they don't believe the public can't distinguish between fact and fiction. I believe there are a lot of people who choose to think for themselves, but we're literally discussing fake news and how so many people just believe things they say they see on the internet. Thoughts? I reread that before I read it. There's a lot going on in that little paragraph there. We could kind of break down and maybe revise a touch. But something it does get me thinking about is the last 5 years or so have shown us that we can't, or at least we're collectively unwilling to, look beyond the comfort of our personal bias when it comes to information that we retrieve in the form of news. And I think media does this business of training us at an unconscious level, and then at the same time consumerism trains us at an unconscious level to like certain things. It's just like choosing what you eat or choosing what to wear. Style, fashion, food, entertainment. We like this choice, and then we're also taught to do buy the things you like, look the way you want to look, and so on. And if we think about news the same way, well, if we've got all these different flavors of news, and I always want my news to be, pistachio well, guess what? I'm going to get a lot of nuts. And the more nuts that are informing me, crazier my worldview is. You see what I did there? I hope you did. I hope everyone enjoyed that one. I wasn't sure I could get there or not, but I did. Hang tight. We're going to take a break. Segment 3 coming up. We're going to jump through a ton more questions, and we're going to have some excellent asynchronous discussion here. Sit tight.